Hey everybody, this is Ashley with Publish with Ashley, and I just wanted to talk about a subject that I know a lot of you are having problems with, and that is bleed. Should I bleed or not bleed, right? That is the question. All right, so we're going to talk about bleed and some of the what it is and some of the problems or things that can happen, especially when you go through the review process. All right, so it's not as complex as it seems, though there's some frustrating errors that can come about if you don't understand what bleed is. All right, so let's look here. I have PowerPoint opened, and see I have my margins set. This is actually for, let me show you something really quick. My design, my slide size is custom slide size, and it is 8 by 10. Okay, so this is set up currently right now as no bleed. All right, no bleed because it is 8 by 10. And that's fine because I've set my margins and nothing is bleeding into the edges. Okay, that's what bleed means. Bleed means it's going to go all the way to the edge. All right. So see how you have lines. People worry about, should I have bleed with lines? Should I not have bleed with lines? If you were going to have your lines basically end, which normally you would, like you could have them extend all the way to the page, but people don't tend to write all the way to the page because, especially on the inside, it's going to go into the spine, and that's not going to make sense. You can't write into there. And then the edge, it kind of looks a little sloppy, and maybe people will write over the end, but generally you can do it either way. It doesn't really matter with KDP. So if you just have lines, it doesn't really matter. You can say bleed or no bleed. The thing that sets KDP off is consistency. So let's say some of your pages run all the way to the end in different places and some don't. That will sometimes trigger an error, even though technically if you've set this up with bleed, if some of your pages bleed to the end and some don't, it really shouldn't make a difference, and technically it is correct. Then it's just the review process. It'll go through the reviewer just fine, but then when it goes through the personal reviewer, you submit it, it'll come back and say you have to change an ad for bleed, right? I'm sure you've seen in the help groups, that sort of thing. And so there's a few ways to go about that, but I'm getting ahead of myself to a certain extent. But that's an error that can happen, and let me show you what some of that means. So right now I have no bleed, right? Now I want to show you what bleed kind of actually would mean and what you might use bleed for. So I'm going to make this a little smaller. This is kind of like a prompt journal thing. Let's say I go like this, and I'm going to move it. I'm going to kind of center this. Okay. Now I have to set this up to be bleed. So what I'm going to do, because I don't really, I'm going to change the slide size. I wouldn't make something and then change the slide size while you're doing it, but since I'm just showing for an example, then it doesn't really make a difference. Here is the dimensions for different sizes for bleed or without bleed, right? So your interior with bleed for an 8 by 10 is actually going to be 8.125 by 1025. I had someone ask me, does it go to 4 decimal places? You know what? PowerPoint kind of rounds. I stick in 8.125 and 10.25, but PowerPoint tends to round it to like 1.23. But it's not a big deal. They're not quite that exact. So 8.125 and 1025. So I'm going to change this so it has the right bleed dimensions. So I'm going to say 8.125 and 10.25. Okay. Now this is going to make it a little, I'm just going to say maximize. Like I said, I wouldn't change this. I wouldn't make something and then change it while in it, but I'm just trying to show you. So now this is set up for bleed. So what does bleed mean? I have a picture here. It's in this one. And I'm going to drop it on here. Okay. Now see, if I want something to bleed, it means it goes all the way to the edges. So this is going to be like a background. Maybe I'll take this right here I'm going to actually send this to the back. Send to the back. Now this is in front, and I'm going to actually fill this shape here with white. And I lost my thing, so I probably have to send it backward. There we go. And now my word comes back out. All right, so this is what bleed is something that would go all the way to the edge that, yeah, when it crops it, it's not going to matter if some of this gets cropped off, see, because, you know, it's kind of just decorative stuff. You can have borders that go all the way across from top to bottom, like something here. But let's say I do, this actually might not set it off, but sometimes if I have, let's say on this page right here, I would have like a character or something, and this page I have full bleed to the edges, and this page I don't. Sometimes KDP, the reviewer will come back and say, oh, you need to add bleed because it thinks that these pages don't need bleed and this page does need bleed, and so it makes an error. And so what I've done to avoid that, if I keep getting that error and I've tried to, it shouldn't, this size right here, 8.125 and 1025, that is correct. That is 8 by 10 with bleed. So it's just the automatic reviewer being wonky, which is very frustrating. And so sometimes I've just resubmitted it a few times when I know I have the right size. And yes, I know this page doesn't need bleed and this page does, but that's because they're different pages, right? But it's inconsistent, so sometimes it will trigger something in the algorithm. And so I'll just resubmit it, and sometimes it'll be fine. And sometimes if it still doesn't go through like the second time, what I will actually do, because I get annoyed sometimes, is if I have mixed pages where not every single page goes to the edge with a pattern of some sort, what I'll actually do, just because it annoys me, is I will actually make it not go into the bleed. I will actually just make it smaller, which might upset people. Maybe they want it to go all the way to the edge. And I will, I'll be okay with that sometimes. It kind of depends on what I'm creating. And if this would really affect my design, then I might actually you can email customer service and tell them, Amazon's customer service at KDP, and say, hey, this won't go through. I have it set for bleed. Yes, some of the pages have full bleed and some of the pages just have white around the edges, but that's how I want it to be. They should be able to fix that and manually have it go through. But sometimes I'm just not, that's not worth the effort for me. So I will just fix things down. See, in this case, it still looks really pretty with kind of a frame around it, right? I get like a framed idea. So this, if I was just doing this and it kept getting kicked out, I would actually just make this smaller and submit it like this, and it would not have a problem at all now because there's consistent white edges. You could do this. Let's see. Let me go back here. Make this so it goes the full page. It's a little bigger, but it's good enough. Control C for an example. Go back here. You know, you could add something to the back of all of your pages, right? And then you do kind of what I did here. You know, you have this Control C, Control V, and, you know, you make it so that it works. And then I'll just fix all the, like this is going to go, that's going to go all the way to the back. This is going to go backwards, send backwards. It might be easier to actually send it that way and then move it up forward. There we go. And do something like this. And maybe I would take off this line, or maybe I would make this go to like right there or something. Anyway, so you can do something like that, and that way all the pages would have bleed and it should be completely fine. There's something to the end. You don't have to keep the same pattern. You can use a different pattern, but that way it should be completely fine. There would be no discrepancies. But like I said, sometimes when you mix, like this has white and this has a pattern, it just trigger something weird, but it should be fine technically. So I've actually emailed them and said, hey, my book is supposed to be like that. Some pages have, you know, the design all the way to the edge for bleed, and some have white, and that's the way it's supposed to be. And it works just fine. I'm not sure why, but that's kind of how that is. So hopefully this is helpful about the bleed, no bleed. People ask me with lines, do I need bleed? Do I not bleed? You know, it doesn't matter. See, this would go, if I had this 8x10, or now it's set with the bleed dimensions, this will still go through KDP, a bunch of pages like this. No problem. It's consistently has nothing around the edges, so it should be just fine. I generally, if you don't know what you're doing, I say don't do bleed and make your nice margins and be good. Now, once you get to where you want to add background patterns, do consider, you know, that mixing and matching of things might cause issues, and so you might be more frustrated. So that's why I always say it's more of a don't start with bleed, start with no bleed. But if you're just doing lines like this, if it was just a blank line journal and it's going to be nothing to the edges, it won't matter either way. That's going to be perfectly fine. So anyway, I hope this was helpful, and I will see you again on my next video. Thanks so much. Bye.